Hi, welcome to the Chris and Gary Show, where we talk about all things real estate. My name's Chris Scott. I'm a real estate digital marketer, and today I have a special guest. I've got Kyle Stroschein, who is actually in charge of all the marketing at Paperless Agent. Welcome, Kyle. Today we're talking about the one-page real estate business plan. Let's dive in. So, Kyle, we've developed a business plan, a one-page business plan format specifically for people in real estate. If you were to go Google business plan, you're going to get lots and lots of templates and lots of things that are out there. However, we crafted one very specifically for people in real estate because, well, we're in real estate. And so what we noticed is that because for most of us who are producers, right, meaning that we are real estate agents or brokers who sell real estate, we tend to think like a business, but we also think like an individual. And that's why I think having a business plan tailored for those of us in real estate is necessary and also going to allow us to get a much better return in terms of our effort and getting to the goals that we want. So this business plan consists of 14 different prompts, if you will. And I thought, Kyle, today, if we could just role play, right, us going through these questions and then letting people know how they can access some of these tools and resources in the show notes.
Yeah, sounds great, Chris. And I think you nailed it. It's so important that when you're creating a business plan, it's tailored to your specific goals and needs. And so that's what the prompts walk you through. It's not, your general templated plan. It's to get you thinking about what happened last year, what you want to do next year, and how to bridge the gap in between. And by following the prompts in the one-page real estate business plan we'll lay out, it will walk you through that process, kind of step by step, going from where you were to where you want to go. And yeah, I'm happy to play the part of the agent today. Actually, just hosted a training on this for our membership. So I'm well versed and received lots of feedback on sort of what the agents in our membership are going through at the moment. So I think I can speak on behalf of them a little bit.
One of the most common things that we hear, and this is, for as long as I've been in real estate, so for over 20, 25 years, one of the most common responses to the question of like, hey, what's your goal? How many home, what do you want? How much do you want to sell? Whenever I've sat down either with individuals or in large groups and asked them, hey, let's walk through the process of setting our real estate goals. The most common response that I'll hear is, well, I want to double my production. Right.
I've heard it many times, and it's a great lofty goal.
It is.
But how do you get there? I think is the big question.
That's the big thing, right? People will say, I want to double my production. Oh, okay, great. Awesome. I've even heard, in the last few years, the 10Xing your production has become popular. I'm going to 10X my business. And kids
in the post-COVID market, that probably felt very doable. Last year, maybe not as much, but yeah, I think we were looking with big eyes at what was happening in the real estate market.
Well, whenever you talk about either doubling or just multiplying your production at any level, I think it's very important to ground yourself in a little bit of reality. And that's why the first question or the first prompt that we have in our one-page business plan is, what happened last year? Okay. And so what happened Kyle, let me ask you a question. In terms of real estate sales, real estate performance, you're playing the real estate agent today that's under the scrutiny, that's developing your one-page real estate business plan. What happened last year?
So if I'm looking back at last year and, just if we speak about the market real quick before I get into the role play, we went from 6 million homes for sale to somewhere under or just right about 4 million. So I think, if I'm speaking for the typical agent, I'm saying, Chris, last year, to be honest, was tough. I feel like a lot of my tried and true methods for getting clients stopped working. The stuff that had been working for years in the run up before slowed down. So last year was tough. I went from, 10 million in production to I'll be lucky if I close 5 before the year's out.
Stop right there. See, what you just described, Kyle, is a real reflection on what we know. Getting into what happened last year is grounding yourself in what you're currently capable of doing, right? What the current market is capable of allowing you to produce, or, like in terms of how easy or how hard that will be, or what systems you might need in place. But a lot of times people will jump into what my goal is without even stopping to think, where have I been in the last year? And I think that's before you can even start setting a goal, before you can even start thinking about what you want to accomplish, it's very important to reflect on what happened last year. Now, when I encourage people to reflect on what happened in the last year, I suggest that they do more than just looking at their production numbers, right? A lot of times people will say, well, I sold X million dollars, right? And when you colored it in by saying, the previous year I sold 10 and this year I'll be lucky if I close 5, that's really good, but it's only one dimension of our plan. It's only one dimension, meaning that you're only looking at the production level. But what I would encourage people to do is to look beyond just the result. Look past the result. Now, I think you should look at the result. How many homes did I sell? What was my average sales price? What was my volume, right? How many leads did I generate? How many appointments did I go on? What was my conversion rate, right? I think we should be looking at that, but those are all results orientation. And I think in addition to evaluating the results that we did, I think we also have to reflect, here's the key word, reflect on what else happened? What did I try doing? Right? You said it. Hey, we went from on average, as an industry selling 6 million homes down to selling 4 million homes. That's a real estate transaction recession, right? And it's important to acknowledge that. You also have, like in like the market that we just had in the last really 2 year and a half, it's important that you have grace for yourself, because if you're sitting here today and you're watching this today, that means you just weathered a tremendous storm in real estate. You just weathered a tremendous storm, meaning that there's a really good chance the worst of what has happened in terms of our industry is in the rear view mirror now, right? There's a good chance. Now, I'm not going to say that that's definitely the case, but interest rates are already starting to come down. There's already a little bit of glimmer of hope of what's happening in the market as of this recording. And so if the worst of us is behind us, we need to have a little bit of grace of what we just got through and maybe celebrate a little bit. If you went, Kyle, from selling $10 million in real estate to lucky to closing 5, guess what? You made it. Right?
Yeah, still here, still producing, and that's probably better than a lot of agents, unfortunately, at the moment. I know there's been a little bit of an exodus from the industry.
Well, a lot of what happens is a lot of people, they start having to take jobs, they start having to do things to supplement their income. Maybe they start driving Uber, right? Like they do all kinds of stuff, but they slowly leave the business, and that's probably most likely what's in process right now, because it has been a rough, more than rough, it's probably a rough year and a half, really.
Yeah.
So ever since the Fed had raised interest rates. Okay, so that's the first question, or the first prompt that we want to dive into, is what happened last year. Now, the second thing is to really get into the details, like how did you perform last year? So this is getting into the detail of how many homes did I sell? What was my average sales price, right? So Kyle, let me ask you, how did you do last year from a performance standpoint?
So if I'm giving myself some grace and I say, okay, well, part of this is definitely due to the market. If there's, 30% less homes for sale, then naturally that's going to hurt my business. But given that grace, now if I take an honest assessment of the business activities, I don't think I adjusted fast enough to what was changing. So I started to notice pretty early on in the year that referral business was my primary and only source of business. So all that extra stuff I was doing, the, open houses, the postcards, these sort of PPC ads I was running, that dried up pretty quickly. And I kept doing it. So if I'm looking pretty honestly, I think if I recognized that sooner, maybe that's stuff I could have scaled back and, really focused on just nurturing my sphere of influence, nurturing my contacts and connections, and tried to use that as my main source of business, recognizing that's what was happening in the shift,
That's a good timeout. Stop right there. So in looking at how you performed, again, we have, when setting our business plan for what we want to achieve in the next year, what we're trying to do is color in more and more detail of how did we do in the last year? How did we perform? What did we do? I love the way you talk about, Kyle. I noticed there was a shift, but I didn't change my activities. And, it actually makes a lot of sense when the market slows down like it has, or it had, and all of a sudden the People buying a home from a just purely lifestyle perspective starts to dry up a little bit, right? All of a sudden, then when people are buying and selling, like they have in the last year or so, it's usually people who have to. It's
And
usually
that's
people
what
who,
I found from the people in my sphere who were reaching out, was that it was people who were, lifestyle changes, baby boomers moving closer to family or downsizing, or, well, some millennials maybe who bought during the pandemic and then were ready to move out, sort of being a little bit of post, purchase regret and stuff. But it was forced moves more than anything else.
it could be deaths, it could be marriages, children, all that stuff where it's like, oh, all of a sudden their motivation to move is really high. And those types of people you're going to find typically through your sphere of influence, through your contacts and connections, because those people, they have to move and they want to work with somebody that they trust, right? They want to work with, because it's not like I'm just going to upgrade my lifestyle or change up my lifestyle, right?
Right.
These people either have a high sense of urgency to be able to make this happen, regardless of what's going on with the industry in terms of home values, so on and so forth. So they have to move. Interest rates being really high. If you're going to buy a home, you either coming in with cash, right? Or you have to move and you're willing to pay for that higher interest rate. And so, that's, I think, really good. Those first two prompts are very key to get to the third one, right? So now that you've got a good assessment, and I encourage people to write these things down, right? That's why we have the one-page business plan. You actually want to write this stuff down, all the responses. You don't have to write it like it's some kind of college essay. You can literally write in it like it's your journal. It's more of a reflective process than it is I'm going to share this with my board of directors type document, right? This is for you. It is not for anybody else but you. So don't worry about making this, again, sound super sophisticated. You can write your responses to these prompts as though you were writing in your journal, or whatever, your diary, whatever you want to call it. So those two things though are very important, because if you're creating a real estate business plan, assessing where you were now allows you to have the right perspective, the right mindset, the right perspective about asking yourself, what do you want to achieve? So now, Kyle, let me ask you, you just shared with us that you tried a bunch of stuff, but you were late to responding to the market. You had sold 10 million in the previous year, and this year you'd be lucky to close $5 million. So what do you want to achieve in the next year?
So if I'm looking at what I want to achieve, knowing that, knock on wood, most experts are saying we've reached a bottom, and next year, hopefully we're trending up. I'd obviously like to do better. So it'd be nice to stick with the double your production and get back to where I was. But if I'm setting a more realistic goal, I think 7.5 in total production would be a comfortable place to be, and give me the platform for the next year to jump back towards 10 and sort of where I was.
All right. So now here's the thing. Some of this, just time out here for a second, because sometimes when people respond to this, you have two kinds of people I've noticed. You've got people like me and Kyle, where we like to kind of take what we think is doable, right? We want to say,
approach,
a pragmatic, realistic approach. And then you have other people who are like, no, I'm gonna shoot big, right? I want to go big. And I think realistically, you want to land somewhere in the middle, right? I know there's a lot of goal setting theory where it's like, hey, you want to be able to, or goal setting advice where people say, oh, you want to dream big, you want to think big, you want to think these big, hairy, audacious goals. But when you look at, and this is a study I came across, published journal, I think it was in Harvard Business Review or something like that. And they folks did some research on goals and goal setting, and why, I think it was like close to 90% of people had failed at their goals when they looked at it from, beginning of the year to the end of the year. And they found there were like three distinctive reasons why that is the case. The first one is that the goal was not attainable in the first place, right? Like, even though they wanted to do it, they could not do it. So let me give you an example. Let's say I set a goal of wanting to do open heart surgery on Kyle by next month. Now, I'm not a doctor, okay? But hey, but I have medical inclinations. And so I'm going to do open heart surgery on Kyle next month. Yeah, I don't care how big I'm dreaming. It's simply not happening, at least not legally. And Kyle probably won't live if I were to
Yeah.
try it.
Call me in 16 years when you've been through residency, med school, specialization, all the works.
So yeah, one of those reasons that people didn't realize their goals is it was just never attainable in the first place. Like me trying to do open heart surgery on Kyle. So, what do you want to achieve? So you said what you want to do 7.5 million in production. Okay, now here's the next step though, and I think this is important to realize is you can't just stop at that high level number. And here's why is that you have to break it down into smaller chunks. You have to break it down into smaller chunks so that you can start to understand what your plan of attack is going to be. Because just having 7.5 million, right, really doesn't tell you enough. Yes, you can just go. The problem with doing 7.5 without having like it broken down into bite-sized chunks, it's hard to make a really specific plan. So your plan becomes try harder. And I'll tell you what, that's a horrible plan. Most people fail in their goals because their plan is simply to try harder. If you were going to succeed at trying harder, you would have already succeeded by now, right? Like try harder is not a solution.
And it's something that we hear all the time. And there's no faster track to burnout. And if you look back last year and you're being honest with yourself, I bet you say you tried pretty hard.
Yeah.
I don't think it was for lack of trying that probably you ended up where you did. Maybe there's a few out there, but for the vast majority of people, uh, there's so much gas in the tank with all the other priorities. There's only so much
You
you have
can't
to
run
go
a red
around.
line.
Yep.
Because and a lot of times people they feel guilty, right? Like it's a false sense of I should try harder because they feel guilty or whatever the case may be. It's like, no, okay, just erase that from your thinking. So what we want to do is break it down into smaller bite-sized chunks, meaning that, okay, well, what's my split between buyers and sellers, right? And that's one place that we can start. What's my average sales price going to be? How many deals am I going to shoot for? Ultimately, you can break this down to how many appointments do I need to go on? For those of you who have been tracking your numbers and understand, how many leads you generate and what percentage of those leads generated turn into appointments, you might even be able to set goals around your lead generation. Some of you might want to just set goals around tracking that so that you can do that in the future, right? You might have, different conversion rates on different types of leads, right? A referred lead is typically going to be your highest quality lead. And so you might have a specific conversion rate there. You might want to look at what your success rate is on getting a signed listing agreement when you go on a listing appointment. And all of these things are trackable. But the reason why we want to have those numbers filled in, particularly, is so that if we have them from the previous year, we can also start to use that to come up with a more specific set of goals. So instead of just saying I want to hit 7.5 million, I'm going to hit 7.5 million, and then you can break it all the way down to which was going to require me to go on 1.5 appointments per week, which really means I got to generate probably 5, 6, 7 leads, highly qualified leads in a given month. All right. And so now all of a sudden we can start to design a plan around it. But before we get into a plan, Kyle, when we're working on our one-page real estate business plan, once we establish what it is that we want to achieve, we have to ask ourselves why we want to achieve it. Now, you might say, well, why does that even matter? Right? Like, why would it matter that I ask myself why? And if you really think about it, though, if I were to ask you, why do you want to double your production? Well, it's because that's what I used to do 2 years ago. That's not a strong enough why.
Right.
Why do you want to double your production? Well, everyone else in my office is doing it, so maybe I should too. Not a strong enough why. If your why is not strong enough, you will throw in the towel inevitably because the goal that you set doesn't matter to you that deeply. And so we have to ask ourselves why. So let me ask you, Kyle, you said you wanted to get to 7.5 million in production. Why is that number important to you?
Well, obviously making more money is always nice, but given sort of how you framed it, if I'm thinking a little bit more deeply about it, I suppose the last year we had to choose between like after school activities for the kids because money got tight with that steep of a reduction and, the stuff we sort of took for granted. We started having to make tougher choices. And I would just like to get back to that feeling of being able to provide, whatever they want to do, they have access to. So if I'm being honest, I
Mm.
think that'd be my main motivating factor for trying to really increase the production over the next couple of years.
What and that could actually that's a really good one, Kyle, because once you start to understand your why, you might go back and revise your goal, either up or down. Right, to your point, you might say, well, my kids, they really love, let's say your kids are involved in, I don't know, football at school or something like that. And in order for them to like, school activities are
I
expensive,
was a
right? I
select
got
soccer player, and between travel and jerseys, I know I did a number on my parents. So,
so here's the thing, that costs money. Everything from the activity itself, the traveling, the coaches, the specialized
Mhm.
coaches that you end up getting, because you want your children to have opportunity. And I'll tell you what, I know that costs a lot of money. I got 3 kids in marching band right now, and it's like, oh my goodness, between the tutors and everything. But what happens is now all of a sudden you've got a really specific number. Right now, you've got a specific number, and maybe your why is a little bit different. Maybe your why is because you had to make other compromises, other sacrifices. Maybe your why is this. Maybe you've got some kids or grandkids that are looking at, they're college bound, and you had said that you wanted to help them, and all of a sudden last year you couldn't help them, and so you want to make good on that commitment that you had made previously. Now all of a sudden, your why means a lot more, and then you can start to assess the what, right? The goals themselves, and now you can revise them, but also give them more meaning.
Mm. I think it's important because we talked about trying harder, and
Mm-hmm.
there will be some aspect of trying harder or at least putting your effort into different things, right? And so that's sort of what the activities that we just did. It's like identifying those actual like revenue producing activities and spending more of your time doing that. But if you know your why and you can tie it to those goals, you'll be so much more willing to like take a couple hits, have a few setbacks, then just keep going, really find the stuff that's working, reinvest in that, invest your time in it, and it will keep you motivated and going. I do this exercise whenever I do yearly planning, and it helps tremendously just throughout the year when like you banked on this new lead source, you bought some Zillow leads and you're like, this is going to be it, this is going to solve my problems, and it doesn't pan out, and it's just it feels the time spent, the money spent, but keep your goal in mind, it's a little bit easier to pick yourself back up and just try the next thing that you had on your list.
Exactly. So now that we've talked about the what, we've talked about the why, right? And anyone who wants to like challenge the why, you should go watch some of the Simon Sinek videos online about what's your why. But it really is, it's tapping into a deeper source of motivation, while also helping to clarify what it is that you want to do. But the next prompt in our one-page real estate business plan is, what's the gap between your goals and where you were, right? So for you, Kyle, your gap is, let's just say let's say you close out this year or the previous year at 5 million, and so now you're going to shoot for 7.5. That's $2.5 million increased production. Now that gap, you can't just stop, like I said, even when we're establishing the what, like, you need to get down into, well, how many more deals does that represent? What's the change in average sales price if I'm going to be shooting for a change in average sales price? Identifying the gap helps you understand where you need to go to work. So for example, let's say one of your assumptions is, I'm going to go from $400,000 to $450,000 in average sales price. Well, my plan needs to take into account how that's going to happen.
Mm.
Me just thinking it's not going to change it. Me just thinking it's not going to all of a sudden mean that I now have a higher average sales price. I got to do something about that. Okay. I got to do something about that. But I also have to ask myself, like, going all the way down to, how many appointments do I need to generate? How many leads do I need to generate? Like, what are my conversion rates for all of those things? Again, we need to understand the gap of what our current level of performance is and where we're trying to go to. This is one where I really think it's just a matter of writing the stuff down so you can visually recognize that gap.
Even I think if you're not currently tracking this stuff, an easy place to start would be to look at all the closings you had last year and just think about each of those individuals and where they came from. Was it somebody you knew in the past? Was it somebody who responded to an ad? Was it a referral from a friend? I bet you know most of them in your head, locked away somewhere. If you were to stop and think, or even like search your inbox for your first contact with that person, you can go back and at least get some baselines on, you know, these activities. You'll see pretty quickly, like, oh, most of them came from referrals from friends or whatever. You'll see it pan out. And you can use that as a baseline to start doing some of this and, making some assumptions about conversion rates and things.
Well, and I think that's a good one is when you start to understand what that gap is. And or gaps, really gaps,
Mhm.
right? When you think about it, it really represents a series of things where I need to go to work so that I can then improve my production. We call this substantiation of the
Mhm.
goal, right? What we're doing is we're first we've understand what our current level of performance is and what we've done. We've identified where we want to go. We've identified that there is a bridge that we need to close. And that becomes the essence of your plan, like Kyle was saying, right? That is now where you put pen to paper and you start to ask yourself, like, what's my plan of action going to be? Which is actually the next prompt, which is how will you achieve these goals? The how, right? Notice that we've gone through 5 previous prompts before we ever even get into the how at
And
all,
hopefully you
right?
see the reasoning behind that. If you just think of how am I going to make more next year, it's like deer in the headlights. I don't know. Use the default is to try
Try
harder.
harder.
Exactly. But if you've taken the steps to be like, oh, well, this is where my business came from, I could probably do some more of that. And if I find these sort of like slightly related, sort of activities to that, or just doubling down on that activity, you can start to say like, oh, well, I can push that number a bit and that will close the gap that much.
Yeah.
And I could try this activity, I'll close it that much more.
That's a good point. Like a lot of people they're going to find in the last year that referrals, recommendations, business from contacts and connections, their sphere of influence, right? That's where so much of the
Hmm.
business probably came from people. And yet most of us don't really do a whole lot
Right.
to get business from that source.
We almost take it for
Here,
granted, I think, is a lot of thing that ends up happening.
I was listening to one of the popular coaches the other day, and he was asking the question, how many of you acknowledge a referral that you've received
Mm.
from the person who referred you? And, I think if most people are honest, most people, they don't do, a lot of people don't do anything. I know what we do? Like we give them a gift.
Yeah.
We give the person who referred us a gift. We don't wait for the closing of that referral. We want to reward the behavior of the referral. So that means, the gift is going to be maybe a little bit
Right.
smaller, but, a gift certificate to their favorite restaurant, right? Something along those lines. One of the tips that my business partner Gary likes to use is he'll call to thank people for the referral. To say, hey, Kyle, thank you for referring Joe or, Jonah to us. And, you know, uh, just want to let you know I'm going to take great care of them. If you ever have any questions, just feel free to reach out to me. And so, anyway, hey, I was just curious, what do you guys got going on for the weekend? Just changing it up a little bit. I don't want to have to always talk shop with you. What do you got going on this weekend? Oh, great, yeah. Oh, we're thinking of going out to eat downtown. Let me ask you, what's your favorite place? We're trying to figure out where to eat. What's your favorite place to eat downtown that we might be able to try? And so they'll say, wow, I love to go to Perry's Steakhouse. This is my favorite place to go to downtown, which is a popular steakhouse down in Austin. And so Gary won't go to that. Instead, well, he might go there to pick up a gift card to send to them as a thank you for that referral. Right? Most people, though, aren't thinking at that level to reward the behavior. So now all of a sudden that person immediately gets a gift card to their favorite restaurant.
And the personal
By the way,
connection of it being tied to something that they had said they were interested in. It's a really great script, Gary.
So that is very effective because, let me ask you a question. The next time I have an opportunity to refer somebody, it's like, I'm not going to do it for the gift certificate. I'm going to do it because Gary did something nice for me and I want to do something nice for him in return. It has nothing to do with about getting gift certificates or whatever. It has all to do with, gosh, Gary called me to thank me. And then he said, we had a conversation. And I happened to tell him what my favorite restaurant is. And then lo and behold, a gift card shows up to that restaurant. Gary's a really good guy. I like him. Next time I have a chance, I want to help him out. And that's how you start to facilitate that. That's how you actually, one of the many, many ways that you can grow your recommendation business is just by treating the people who referred you really well. Now, here's the thing. When you get into those plans, now you can start asking yourself, well, how do I get more of that type of business that I'm having success with? Right? How do I amplify that? That now all of a sudden becomes a plan. Your plan, though, needs to address the whole thing, right? Everything that we've done to point is to really get into the level of detail. Because let's say your plan really does require you to increase your average sales price, but you haven't identified that as one of the numbers that you need to go focus on. And so therefore you've got nothing in place to work on that. Well, now you're just hoping that it happens that your average sales price grows. I will say this for people who are like, maybe not as focused on recommendation business. By working your contacts and connections over time, your average sales price does grow over time just naturally by focusing on those people, because as they become repeat clients, as their networks grow, as they grow as individuals, typically their income grows and their housing opportunities grow and the quality of their referrals grow because their network is improving from a net worth standpoint. And so, yeah, that's one of the ways you can grow up, but you can be even more specific. Like, oh, well, I'm actually going to start targeting, a different section of this subdivision that has more, higher average sales price than the one I've been focusing on. Maybe I've been focusing on the first time buyers, which is really in certain types of homes. Now I'm going to focus on the move up buyers. So, we've gone through everything from figuring out what we need to do and where we've been and what our goals are and what the gap is. Now we get to a really, really important prompt, which is what's holding you back. So let me ask you, Kyle, what do you think is going to hold you back from achieving your goal or goals in the next year?
Well, can I just say interest rates? I know that's not the answer we're looking for. We're trying to take it out of the market's hands as much as possible. So what's holding me back? Well, I think I started all of this by saying, focusing on the wrong sources of business was something that held me back last year. So I need to fix that, or it's going to hold me back next year, I would assume. But if I'm looking at other conflicts and, I do want to spend that, part of my why was to have more freedom for my kids to do things. Well, I want to be there with them as they're doing those after school activities. Now that probably cuts into some work time. So if there's a conflict, I can see one coming up there.
Well, that's actually a really good point about conflict. When we look at what's holding us back, one of the things that we have to do is look for conflicts that we have control of. I referenced a study about that I think was published in Harvard Business Review about how people why people don't achieve their goals, and one of the big reasons why is our goals are in conflict with other priorities in our life. And so let's say you have a goal to increase your production, which might mean that you have to increase the amount of time that you're spending making that production happen. Well, if another priority of yours though is to spend time with your kids, or common one I've been hearing lately is I need to help take care of a parent or a grandparent, and I want to be able to do that, is be able to spend more time with them, helping take care of them as they get a little bit older. Well, now all of a sudden that might come in conflict with our real estate goals, and that is actually one of the biggest reasons why we fail, or we basically throw in the towel or silently give up on a goal, is we just say, oh, I can't do it. And so
this other thing's more important. So I'm just start focusing on that, and slowly the goal slips away over time.
Exactly. Now, here's the thing. If we can identify those potential conflicts well in advance, two things that we can do. One is we can change our goal, right? So you might say, maybe it's 6.5 this year, right? Like maybe that's what I need to do is 6.5 million in production, not 7.5. Or you might say, this is going to be a conflict. I need more time, but I don't want to sacrifice either one of these two things. Where can I find the time? Where can I find the time? I'll say that we probably have enough time to do a lot of things in our life. One of the things you might have to do is give up a little bit of the scrolling and the doom scrolling on social media, right? You might have to give up some of that. We might have to make a few lifestyle changes. Or we might have to pick up a few new habits or get rid of a few habits in order to make that happen. But identifying those conflicts and being mindful of them is really the first step, right? What happens is we ignore the fact that they are conflicts. We just go chugging along, pursuing our goals. And next thing you know, the conflict seems like it comes out of nowhere, but a lot of times we will have known that it was a possibility. Now, you had said something at the very beginning, like, interest rates. Yes, things like affordability, right? Things like inventory, those are things outside of our control. At least I think for most of us, housing affordability is outside of your control. You don't, unless somebody knows Powell and has a lot of influence to say, yo, don't raise the rates, bro. Keep them low.
If
right?
only.
Or maybe you happen to be a home builder and you can add homes, to the. But for most of us, we don't have that. And so what we have to do is, instead of looking at what we can't control, is control the things that we can, right? And so, first part, identifying those conflicts is so important so that we can be aware of them and not just tunnel visioned and then getting knocked out of our goal or pursuit of our goal because we just weren't paying attention to the reality of the life that we live. So that's a good one. I think that's a really important one. It's one that I have oftentimes underestimated. When I have ignored the conflicts and just pursued the goal, like ignoring the conflict is when I've gotten in a lot of trouble in my life. A big one for me, for example, is, pursuing a goal, trying to work hard, and then, oh, I'm neglecting my family too much. Right. And so that was a big one. I had to learn that lesson. Right. But it took me many, many years to learn that lesson. And so now, but it's part of my thinking. So now when I set goals, it's like, okay, what can I reasonably accomplish? Because I know, for me, for example, that I'm going to be at my kids' band stuff. I'm going to be at my kids', martial arts things. I'm going to be at all their activities I want to be at, I want to be part of, and I want to be doing stuff. Well, that means maybe I can't go speak at that conference. Maybe I can't go do that extra appointment, and I'm going to have to accept that. In the long run, I know I'm going to be happier. In the long run, I know I'm going to be happier when I factor those conflicts in, and I can really live life accordingly. So.
Well, the other thing it helps me with is actually the all or nothing mindset, which is something I fall victim to a lot, which is, so if I take, a few years ago, I was doing CrossFit a lot and fitness was sort of like my full-time goal, but it was all or nothing. So I was either on the full clean eating, exercising every day, full commitment. But as soon as any one of those things got knocked, so a work priority came up and I couldn't make it to the gym like I normally would. Or if, I go out of town and my eating gets out of whack for a weekend, or any one of those little things that can come up. Back then, it would mean I gave up on everything because it was no longer worth it. I failed to identify the conflicts early enough to be okay and make compromises when they arose, right? So for me, this is a good practice because if I identify it and I say like, okay, well, I'm okay with these trade-offs because I'm saying this set of things are the most important things and I will juggle them in this way. Then I'm okay with like it's that try harder mindset, honestly, is probably what it gets back to. I say, that's not me failing. That's not me not trying hard enough. That's me saying, I'm okay with these compromises and this is the goal I expect given the time I can give to everything. And it just helps you keep it in balance and realize like, oh man, if you miss a day or you don't, make as many calls as you wanted to that day, but it's because of the other conflicts you identified and you're just making the trade-off, you're not going to say like, oh, well, that's a personal failure of mine. It's like, no, I made a choice and now I'm just, that's the nature of the choice and that's okay.
I think you hit on something really important, which is our mindset in how we process our life. And it really comes down to, is the glass half full or is the glass half empty type of thinking? Because ultimately, you want to be able to live your life well, right? You want to look back on your time spent, whether it's the last year or the last decade, and say, you know what, I did a pretty good job of that. So much of that, though, is just in between here. Has nothing to do with, did we in fact do a good job? We started this off by saying, hey, if you're still selling real estate, you win. You won. Yeah. You got through a really hard time in real estate. You're still here. You won. But a lot of people aren't going to be sitting, patting themselves on the back saying, you know what? I just weathered this pretty severe storm and I'm still here. Right. A lot of people are like, man, I didn't do good enough. I didn't do hard. I didn't try hard enough. I didn't do this. I didn't do that. I didn't do that. And so all of a sudden, whether you had a good year or not is really just in between here in the perspective that we have about it. And so, if you can give yourself some grace by identifying those conflicts and saying, that's going to happen. Accept it, right? Accept it because it is going to happen. And you can either accept it and move on with life or not. And then all of a sudden things are difficult. I met a grand master in karate, which means he's a 10th degree black belt, which means this person has been devoted to the martial arts for like probably 30 or 40 years, right? And I was asking him about, we were having a conversation about successes and failures. And one of the really interesting things that I found that he had shared with me, he said, one of the hardest lessons that I had to learn, and I had to have this beaten over my head multiple times, was I had to learn how to lose. I had to learn how to lose. Now, this is a guy who was a champion winner, won multiple world championships at point fighting and stuff in the martial arts. And what he said is that his biggest problem, one of the biggest struggles that he had, was learning how to lose. And you might say, oh, yeah, meaning that you don't want to lose. And that was his mindset. What he realized is in life, you have to learn how to lose because you can't win all the time. If you're always winning in one dimensional life, I assure you, you're losing in others. And that's what he found. He was always winning in his martial arts, but he was losing in other areas of his life. He had to learn how to accept, he had to learn how to accept loss in martial arts so he could address those other areas of his life. And so, I think the mindset of your business plan, the mindset going into your real estate business plan has to be one that is inclusive of your life. It can't just be one dimensional and just focusing on doubling or tripling or 10xing your production. A plan that's going to be successful that you can look back over the course of the year and say, you know what? I achieved the things that I set out to do, or most of the things that I set out to do. There's some things that I didn't accomplish. You know what? Maybe they weren't that important to me that they happened to be in the plan, or maybe they weren't. I'm going to include them in the plan next year. Ultimately, whether we have a good year or bad year comes down to how effectively we are at setting goals and planning them out, and making sure that we're really working on the things that matter.
So, Chris, I know we have like a full 14 days, but I know we've also been talking for almost an hour. So I think we've done a pretty good job, hopefully, of showing people how they can go from where they were last year to where they want to go and sort of the stuff in between. Those last few days, are there tips or strategies, other things that you can do to sort of keep you on track, keep you you've made the plan, you have your activities. Now, how do you actually achieve them throughout the year?
As we were talking about this, I realize as we talk about the business plan, the one-page real estate business plan, there's really two parts to it, right? There's the business part, and then there's the personal part, I guess. Mm-hmm. And so really the balance of the prompts that we have in our business plan are about developing yourself. Because ultimately, and we're getting into this when we were talking about mindsets and addressing those conflicts, is so much of your ability to succeed is how you're developing yourself, right? And so analyzing how you spend your time, analyzing what habits you want to create, right? Analyzing, what kind of accountability do I have in place? I mean, you can set goals, but if you have no accountability to them, guess what? There's a good chance you're not going to succeed. It's why so many of us need to have personal trainers or coaches or workout. Like for me, I have a hard time committing to staying in shape, but I do martial arts now, so I got a little peer group to do that with, and then also my whole family now is we do that stuff together. So my wife and I, we kind of hold each other accountable to not the results, but am I getting into the garage to do pump iron? And I, same thing. We encourage each other in that way. It produces a form of accountability. So I would say that just focusing on developing yourself, right? Developing better habits, producing some sense of accountability. All of those things are internal. As you work on yourself, you're going to then have a positive impact on your business. Right? You ever seen the person? You ever work a deal, and the other person on the end of the transaction, you can tell they're really, really thirsty for that commission. Yep,
you can smell it from a mile away.
And so, you're oh my gosh, they are not representing their client well. Mm-hmm. And why is that? Well, because they're probably really struggling in some other areas of life. Could be financially, could be something else going on. But the way it's showing up is, gosh, there's something off with what's going on here, right? And so the best way to address it, and we don't want to be those people. We want to make sure that we can show up and be fully present and working with our clients and taking care of them and developing the business that we want to have. And that means working on ourselves. So I think that you want to make part of your time. You want to make part of your business plan. Your real estate business plan needs to include the activities of you working on yourself. Whether that's acquiring education, acquiring skill. Think about it. Let's say part of your business plan requires you to do something that you haven't done yet. Maybe you want to do home buyer or investment workshops, helping people buy investment properties. Well, that means you have to be able to present. Do you know how to present to a small group of people? Maybe not. That might be a skill that you have to attain. Again, you want to create part of your business plan should have, because we're in real estate, and most of us are solo practitioners, it also has to include how are we going to work on ourselves over the course of the year? Does that make sense?
It does. And I think it's so important because we spoke a lot, and obviously we have the benefit of being marketers first and sort of in real estate second. And so our brains kind of go to marketing sort of solutions. I think that might not be the case. I know it's not when I speak to a lot of agents and the trainings and things that we do. Um, so when you're doing that and you're identifying those gaps in the activities you want, you might not have any fresh ideas for new activities to go after. And that's when you do have to have the practice of saying, like, I'm going to do some research. I'm going to find some new tools or some new trainers or some,
I'm going to get help.
I'm going to go talk to a group of top producers. Yeah, I'm going to get help, which I think is ultimately like a big part of what it comes down to is as solo practitioners, you do fall into that mindset of, I have to do it all myself. You're so used to fixing problems. It's just what you default to, when actually oftentimes the most effective thing you could do is go talk to somebody who's done it and is successful right now. Figure out what they're doing, use that as a springboard for new ideas. So looking outside yourself and then committing to them and, the learning process over it. I think I said it earlier, but part of that learning process will be having setbacks. But as long as you kind of hold to like that self-development mindset and that sort of your why and the bigger picture of what you're shooting for, you'll be able to weather those and say, well, that one didn't work. That's okay. I learned to be okay with failure. I learned to be okay with, losing. I'll go try the next thing.
That's so true, Kyle. That is so true. Now, here's the deal. If you liked what you heard today, do us a big favor. Like this video, drop a comment, let us know what you think, or maybe even tell us what some of your real estate goals and plans are. And take a moment. Let people know. Subscribe to this channel. And we look forward to seeing you in the next episode. If you want access to any of the resources, we'll include some of them in the show notes here in the description. Or you can also just check us out at thepaperlessagent.com.